Step 1. The shock of the headline. September 2023. More than 30,000 men, women, and children from the dusty capital of Ouagadougou to the far-flung Sahel took to the streets. No pay, no orders, and not a single weapon in sight. Step 2. The image in your mind. Farmers still marked by the red earth of their fields. Traders closing their market stalls. Teachers laying aside their chalk. Soldiers setting down rifles for brooms. Step 3. The voice that sparked it. 6 words from the youngest leader in the world at the time. Burkina Faso is ours to protect. Step 4. The wave that spread. From city boulevards to schoolyards, from mosque courtyards to village wells, the sound of sweeping rose like a hymn. Step 5. The change it made. Illness falling. Water running clear. Streets breathing again after years of neglect. Step 6. The promise we must not ignore. Stay with us, because this isn't just another story. It's the future our ancestors dreamed of. Before the brooms ever touched the ground, Burkina Faso was a nation breathing through a clogged windpipe. This small, landlocked country in the very heart of West Africa had learned to live with hardship the way one learns to live with an old wound. Not because it healed, but because there was no other choice. The streets of Ouagadougou, once proud arteries of commerce, lay choked with rubbish. Plastic bags clung to roadside shrubs like parasites. In villages, stagnant pools shimmered under the sun, their surfaces broken only by mosquitoes carrying sickness from home to home. Wells gave water clouded with dust, and the bitter taste of neglect lingered in every cup. For decades, people endured. They endured because promises of help from abroad came dressed in the language of generosity, but stitched with threads of dependency. Aid arrived like rain in the desert, enough to wet the lips, never enough to change the soil. Then came a voice, not from Paris or Washington, not from the boardrooms of development banks, but from a soldier who had once stood in the same dust as the farmers, felt the same heat, and understood the weight of the same hunger. His name was Captain Ibrahim Traoré. At the time, his face was known across the continent, the youngest head of state in the world, a man whose rise had sent shockwaves through the corridors of both African capitals and former colonial palaces. Captain Ibrahim's latest news was on every radio dial, nationalizing the gold that foreign hands had long claimed, standing firm in the alliance of Sahel states, turning away from the tired roots of dependency, and walking into a future shaped by African hands alone. But on that dry September day in 2023, he did something different. He stripped away the speeches, the policies, the treaties, and spoke to the marrow of his people. Burkina Faso is ours to protect. 6 words. No grandeur, no applause lines, but in them, the echo of Thomas Sankra's creed. We are not beggars. We are the builders of our destiny. The words traveled faster than any convoy. They rattled through radios in market stalls, crackled on battered televisions in dim front rooms, rolled off tongues in mosque courtyards, and were carried in the call and response of Sunday sermons. Elders who had seen their nation's pride fade felt a stirring they had not known in years. And something happened. In the capital, a farmer paused his walk to the grain market, leaning on his hoe. A teacher folded the attendance sheet in her hands. A trader slid shut the wooden doors of his stall. Soldiers watching from their barracks exchanged glances. One by one, they stepped forward, not toward the sound of gunfire, but toward the call of a broom sweeping across the stones. At first, it was no more than a ripple. A few streets in Ouagadougou swept clean by hands roughened from years of labor. A schoolyard cleared of broken glass and windblown litter. A single well unclogged so that its water could breathe again. But ripples, when they meet, can form a tide. By the morning after Captain Ibrahim's call, the rhythm of sweeping had begun to beat like a drum across the land. From the crowded stalls of the capital's markets to the narrow dirt paths winding through Sahel villages, people laid down their burdens to take up brooms, shovels, and wheelbarrows. The farmer who had paused by the road now walked with a purpose, broom in one hand, a bucket in the other. The teacher brought her pupils with her, turning the day's lesson into a living exercise in care and pride. The trader who once counted mangoes and millet now counted plastic bottles gathered from a roadside ditch. And the soldiers, yes, the soldiers, stepped out from the shadow of the barracks. Rifles left in their racks, boots dusty from marching now scuffed against the tarmac as they pushed wheelbarrows loaded with debris. Their uniforms no longer marked them as separate from the people. On this day, they were simply neighbors, brothers, sons. What made it remarkable was what was missing. There were no orders from above. No fines for failing to participate. No promise of pay. This was not duty enforced. It was duty embraced. And the sound of it, sweep, scrape, shovel, roll. The wheelbarrows' rattle on uneven streets became the heartbeat of unity. Women, with the authority of market queens, orchestrated the cleanup like seasoned commanders, assigning tasks, checking corners, ensuring that no alleyway was left behind. Children laughed as they ferried buckets of water, splashing each other in the heat, their bare feet quick on the swept ground. By the second day, it was no longer a ripple. It was a flood. Radio announcers read out the names of participating towns like a roll call of honor. Kaya, Bobo Dioulasso, Jibo, Gawa. In some places, drummers played through the night to keep spirits high. In others, elders stood in the newly cleared village squares, leaning on canes, shaking their heads at the sight before them. "I have not seen this since Sankara," one old man murmured. Health workers, long resigned to fighting illness with scarce supplies, began to notice something extraordinary. In neighborhoods where the cleanup was thorough, cases of diarrhea and cholera began to fall within days. Wells once clouded now poured water that caught the light. The air smelled of dust, yes, but a clean dust, not the stench of rot. And word began to spread beyond the borders. The Burkina Faso latest news was no longer about instability or conflict. It was about a people reclaiming their streets with their own hands. By the end of that first week, more than 30,000 souls had joined the movement. 30,000 voices, uncoordinated by any formal decree, yet moving as if guided by one heart. They had not toppled a regime. They had not fought a battle. And yet, in the absence of violence, they had discovered a greater power, the power to change the world around them, starting with the ground beneath their feet. By the third day, Burkina Faso was no longer a collection of towns and villages. It was one vast worksite, an unbroken chain of human hands and human will. 30,000 strong. Not an army of war, but an army of restoration. In the capital, the marketplace, once a place where commerce shouted over the din of traffic, had fallen into a new rhythm. Brooms swept in syncopation, shovels bit into the earth, and the wheelbarrow's wooden handles passed from hand to hand. Merchants worked alongside their customers. A woman who had sold yams in the same spot for 20 years now scrubbed the very stones on which her stall had stood. In Bobo Dioulasso, the country's second city, the air was thick with the scent of soapy water as shopkeepers rinsed their storefronts. In the northern provinces, near the borders with Mali and Niger, young men repaired old wells, hauling up bucket after bucket until the water ran clear. The soldiers' presence was more than symbolic. When they joined the cleanup, it erased the invisible line between state and citizen. No uniforms giving orders. No civilians deferring to authority. Only neighbors working side by side. Some soldiers even brought their families, the smallest children toddling along with dustpans, proud to be part of something bigger than themselves. Everywhere the sounds of the week formed a kind of national hymn. Sweep, scrape, shovel, roll. Drums in one village answered the metal clang of a wheelbarrow in another. Children's laughter filled the pauses between the scrape of hose and the swish of water over freshly cleaned courtyards. But this was not just about cleanliness. It was about health and wanajimam, risur dignity. Public health workers who had spent years fighting uphill battles against cholera and diarrhea began to record something astonishing. In neighborhoods where the cleanup was complete, new cases plummeted. Clinics reported fewer children with fevers. The stench that once clung to certain streets was gone, replaced by the smell of sun-warmed earth and open air. International journalists arrived, cameras in hand. They expected to document hardship, perhaps political unrest. Instead, their lenses filled with images of women in patterned wrappers sweeping market stalls, of school children scrubbing blackboards, of Captain Ibrahim himself, sleeves rolled up, pushing a wheelbarrow beside teenagers in dusty sandals. That image, the head of state, hand on the same rough wood as his people, carried a weight no policy paper could match. It told the nation, I am not above you, I am with you. And when the people saw it, they worked harder. For 7 days, the movement did not falter. Every dawn brought new groups to the streets. In the midday heat, workers rested under neem trees, sharing water and food, before rising again to finish what they had started. By evening, squares once buried under refuse stood open to the sky, and alleys long forgotten now carried the footsteps of children at play. When the final day came, there were no speeches to mark its end, no parade, no fireworks, Only the quiet pride of a people who had looked at the weight of neglect and lifted it together. They had proven something profound. That power does not always come from the barrel of a gun. Sometimes it comes from the sweep of a broom, guided by a shared belief that this land is ours, and it is worth the work of our hands. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing more than a public cleanup, a burst of civic spirit destined to fade when the dust settled. But for those who watched closely, the brooms and shovels told a far larger story. This was not an isolated act. It was a visible expression of a deeper current moving through Burkina Faso, a current set in motion the moment Captain Ibrahim Traoré took the helm. From the earliest days of his leadership, Traoré made it clear that his mission was not simply to govern, but to restore. Restore the dignity lost in decades of dependency. Restore control over the resources that had slipped into foreign hands. Restore the belief that Burkina Faso's future must be written by Burkinabe hands. When the world's headlines carried Captain Ibrahim's latest news, they often spoke of the gold, the decision to nationalize key mines, reclaiming billions in value that had long flowed out of the country. They spoke of the bold step to join the alliance of Sahel states, forging a united front with Mali and Niger in matters of security, trade, and sovereignty. They noted the rejection of policies dictated from former colonial powers and the turning toward partnerships grounded in mutual respect. But what they sometimes missed was the bridge between policy and people. A decree in the capital can change ownership on paper, but a broom in the hand of a villager changes the heart. 7-day mobilization was that bridge. It showed that sovereignty is not only about borders and resources, but about mindset. When 30,000 citizens choose to lift the dirt from their own streets without being ordered, they are also lifting the weight of dependency from their own shoulders. Economically, the movement carried a quiet brilliance. By improving sanitation, the country reduced the burden on its already strained healthcare system. Fewer sick days meant more time in school, more hours in the fields, more trade in the markets. Clean water meant fewer medical imports for waterborne disease treatment. Politically, it was a masterstroke of legitimacy. Traoré had not only called for action, he had joined it shoulder to shoulder with the people. In doing so, he positioned himself not as a ruler distant in a palace, but as a leader walking in the dust with his citizens. For many elders, the sight awakened memories of Thomas Sankara, the president who had planted trees with villagers and built roads with his own hands. There was symbolism here too, rich and unmistakable. To clean is to remove what no longer belongs. It is to reclaim space. It is to say, without a single word, we will decide what stands here now. And that symbolism traveled. Across Africa, observers drew parallels between the Burkina Faso mobilization and other historic acts of collective self-reliance. From Ghana's voluntary community works in the Nkrumah era to Tanzania's Ujamaa village building. Within the country, the momentum did not end when the last alley was swept. Community committees formed to maintain the gains. Local leaders began scheduling monthly cleanup days, weaving the act into the fabric of civic life. Some towns even tied the effort to local markets, offering space to traders who participated in the cleanup. What began as a week-long answer to a leader's call was becoming a habit of ownership. And that was the true victory. Because a people who believe they can clear their streets will also believe they can clear their future of whatever stands in the way. When the last piles of rubbish were gone, something far more enduring remained. The streets were cleaner, yes. The wells ran clearer. But the deeper transformation could not be swept into a bin or measured in liters of water. It lived in the posture of the people, shoulders straighter, eyes lifted, voices steady. For decades, many had carried an invisible weight, the belief that their problems were too vast to be solved without outside hands. That change would always come from somewhere else, from the foreign aid worker, the international donor, the expert flown in with charts and reports. But for 7 days, they had proven otherwise. A boy who had never left his village had seen that his own small hands could bring water up from a well, clear as glass. A mother who had lost a child to cholera now knew that her broom, wielded alongside her neighbors, could help prevent another death. An elder who had lived long enough to see Burkina Faso's pride dim and flicker, now saw it burning again. Not as a gift from a leader, but as a fire kindled in the people themselves. And that changed the way they walked into the days ahead. In Ouagadougou, young men who had once gathered on street corners without purpose now gathered to plan the next cleanup. In rural villages, women's groups began mapping out water points and sanitation needs, pressing local councils for support. Teachers worked community pride into their lessons. It was no longer just about removing waste from the streets. It was about removing the dust from the national spirit. For Captain Ibrahim Traoré, this shift was as important as any gold nationalization or regional alliance. A nation can reclaim its mines, its borders, its partnerships. But unless it reclaims its belief in itself, those victories remain fragile. And so the broom became more than a tool. It became a symbol as potent as any flag. Held in the hands of a child, it said, "We will not wait for someone else to save us." Held in the hands of a soldier, it said, "We protect not only with rifles, but with care." Across the diaspora, the images resonated. African Americans who had marched for civil rights, who had built communities from the ground up, saw in Burkina Faso a reflection of their own long struggle. The understanding that dignity is not granted, it is claimed. And perhaps that is why the movement's story continues to spread. Not because it was the largest mobilization in Africa's recent history, but because it spoke to a truth older than any nation-state, that the power to change the world begins with the will to change the ground beneath your feet. The clean streets of September 2023 would in time gather dust again. That is the way of the world. But now the people knew what to do when it did. They had learned that the future is not swept into place by chance. It is swept into place by choice. The brooms are no longer in motion. The dust has settled, the water runs clear, and the markets hum once more with the sound of trade. But in the quiet that follows, something stirs, something that will not be swept away. September 2023 was not just a week of clean streets. It was a week that proved a truth too often buried beneath years of dependency and doubt, that the heartbeat of a nation lies in the hands of its people. The Captain Ibrahim latest news you may hear in global headlines will speak of gold nationalizations, Sahel alliances, and shifts in geopolitics. The Burkina Faso latest news might measure the tons of waste removed, the drop in cholera cases, the repairs to wells. These are important, but they are only the visible ripples. The deeper current is invisible, the change in the way Burkina Faso now see themselves. No longer as subjects waiting for solutions, but as citizens shaping their own destiny. No longer asking what the state will do for them, but what they will do for their land, their water, their children. And that is the quiet revolution Captain Ibrahim has ignited. One as lasting as any treaty, as potent as any policy. The Captain Ibrahim latest news worth carrying is this. He stood not above his people, but among them, broom in hand, dust on his boots. And together they clean not only their streets, but their sense of who they are. To every elder who remembers the days of Sankara, to every young hand that lifted a bucket in the heat, you are the proof that the spirit of self-reliance is alive. Soul Africa. If this story moves something in your chest, like, share, speak, subscribe because they hid our history long enough. Let's speak our future out loud.